Hello, YouTube, and welcome to today's video. We have a very interesting topic today. We are going to talk about the Forgotten War. That is the Korean War and also the Palestinian conflict. And we're going to look at some very interesting similarities because there are many things that are similar about these two conflicts. And before we get started, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with your friends, write some nice comments, help out the algorithm because it doesn't know what to do with these kind of videos. So please help us out so I can make more interesting content in the future. So, yeah, we see here hot off the press South Korea's spy agency confirmed the age group suspected use of North Korean weapons. Yeah, this came out of Yonhap News Agency a couple days ago. And South Korea's spy agency on Monday confirmed suspicions that North Korean made weapons were being used by the Hamas militant group in its war. Mm, yes, it says that Pyongyang, North Korea, repeatedly denies this. But they have some proof, so they say, that they found weapons with Korean characters and numbers. And yeah, that's what they say. Of course, it came from the Voice of America. And then South Korea went and did some investigation. And sure enough, they have come up with a photo. So yeah, it's very interesting. So we are going to talk about these two conflicts and why there's a North and South Korea and why there's a conflict in Palestine. Yeah, if you're living under a rock, you probably don't know there's a conflict, but we're all not living under rocks, and we all know that there is a conflict in Palestine. And how did it get there? Also, we want to know what happened in Korea and why there's a big conflict and a big difference between North and South Korea. How did it get there? Well, let's start off by talking about Korea. So, before we get started, as I said, you know the drill. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Please stick around until the end so you can see what are our conclusions and how they are very similar conflicts and what are some things that have caused them. So, yeah, please share with your friends and help out the algorithm. That way, we can get more interesting content up online. So let's get started. Well, maybe everybody knows that North Korea, they have a funny-haired dictator by the name of Kim Jong-un. But what do you know about Kim Jong-un? Well, most people don't know very much. So, well, we know that Donald Trump met with Kim Jong un when Donald Trump was the president of the United States. And even Donald Trump, he stepped foot into North Korea, which made him the first sitting U.S. president to go to North Korea. Jimmy Carter has been there, but that was after he was president. And yes, some people, they have tried diplomacy. So that's very good. And actually, when Donald Trump went to North Korea, and after that, the situation got a bit better. But still, North Korea is quite a mysterious country, and we can see some news and travel blogs about it. And we see that it looks somewhat developed. It doesn't look very poor. They always say in the media, the Western media, that it's a very poor country. But we don't see that when we see some travel blogs. And yes, people can travel to North Korea, but you have to go as part of a tour. I haven't been there. Well, I'm an American. So the US State Department, they don't let Americans go there. So it'll be kind of hard to get a visa. They won't give us a visa. But I have been to South Korea and I've been to China. So I think I can give some insights into the conflict as I've been to both China and South Korea. And you will see later why that is important. So, yeah, please stick around and wait till the end, and we'll see some similarities. So, South Korea also is a very wealthy country, and when you go to South Korea, you will see lots of tall buildings, and you will see lots of high-tech trains and much better than in the US, by the way. And also, when you see some travel blogs about North Korea, we also see their trains and their metro, which looks very nice. Looks a bit like what you would see in Russia, maybe in Moscow or in Kazakhstan. If you go to Almaty, they have a very nice subway system, and it looks very similar. So, also in South Korean cities, the public transportation is very good, and it's very easy to get around. And South Korean people, they are very polite and friendly to tourists. So I remember when I was there, I have really bad Korean, but I always told them, I don't eat pork, and they were very polite and tried to give me something that doesn't contain pork. And then I left my camera behind in a Korean restaurant, and luckily they kept it nice and safe. And when I went back the next day, it was still there. So they're very honest. Because in most countries, if you forget your camera, you'll never see it again, including in the United States, most likely. So, yeah, that's how it goes. So, that was very good. So, we want to know how North and South Korea became North and South Korea. Because if you look through the history of Korea, well, yeah, there were some different dynasties, but eventually they became united. And if you go back about 500 years, there was King Sejong. He was very famous king because he created the Hangul alphabet, and the Hangul alphabet replaced the Hanja or the Chinese characters. So now everybody in Korea, North and South, they use Hangul to write, not like in Japan, where they're still using some Chinese characters. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see that. And he is very well respected, and that is because of his contribution to their culture and to their language. So they have some very common history, and they were always united. Well, and then they were kind of closed off. They were a bit of a hermit kingdom. That's why they were called the Hermit Kingdom. So, yeah, that was because they didn't do a lot of trading. However, Japan, they had some other ideas, and Japan in 1910, they took over Korea, and they took over the whole peninsula. And the Koreans, well, they didn't want to be part of Japan, but Japan, they came in and they started to make them speak Japanese, and they made them use Shinto as their religion. They couldn't have another one. So that was kind of interesting that the Japanese, they were kind of harsh, and we see that there is a lot of colonialism, and we're going to talk about the colonialism when we get to the Palestine conflict. So that is already one similarity right there. There was some colonialism going on, but yeah, Japan, soon enough, they found themselves in World War II when, yeah, they started to expand more, and finally they got into World War II, and the U.S. also got in World War II. So, and then the U.S. and its allies, well, they didn't know what to do with Korea, so they decided they would meet in Tehran in the year of 1943. There was the Soviet Union and the United States and the UK and France. Yes, UK and France. They will come up again and again. So the UK and France, they are always on the list where we talk about these type of things. So they decided in their meeting in Iran in 1943 that they would probably divide the Korean peninsula if they could defeat Japan. So the Soviet Union, they had to get involved in the war with Japan so they could get part of the land. So they did. They got involved in the war, and the United States, they dropped a bomb, a atomic bomb on Hiroshima in the summer of 1945, and a couple days later, the Japanese military, they started to surrender the Soviet Union. They came into the Korean peninsula, and the United States, well, they didn't want they didn't want Korea to fall from the north, so they had to very quickly send some military into the south, and they finally agreed with the Soviet Union to split it on the 38th parallel, and that was just north of Seoul. So that's how it got divided. Yeah, it was divided by some other countries. They didn't choose it by themselves. I'm sure if you would have asked any Korean person at that time, they would have said, we want our own country. We don't want to be divided. But they didn't get a choice. So, yeah, the the Americans, they put in a new leader in South Korea. His name was Syngman Rhee. Syngman Rhee, he became the leader, and he put his government in Seoul. Syngman Rhee, he was working with the Japanese, and he was part of the colonial power. And yes, the Japanese, they set up like police and military. They were a colonial power. So Syngman Rhee, he decided to sign on with the Americans so he could keep his job, basically. He wanted to be in power, so he signed up with America. And the Soviets, well, they put Kim Il sung. Kim Il sung was a leader, a general, and was part of the movement that was fighting against the Japanese. So he was a Korean soldier who was fighting against the Japanese occupation. And he was trained by the Soviets and also by China, who was led by Mao Zedong, who was also a communist. So, yeah, that's how it got divided. And then, as soon as it got divided, the Soviet Union, they said, bye bye, we are out of here. And so the US, they also withdrew most of their troops to Japan. So there started to become some border skirmishes for a couple of years between North Korea and South Korea. So kind of like what we see between Hezbollah and Israel today, shooting over the border back and forth and back and forth. And it started to escalate. And finally, in the summer, it was the summer of 1950, well, Kim Il sung, he decided, well, maybe we can try to unify the peninsula by force. So he sent his military racing into Korea, South Korea, and he took over Seoul and started to push back. And pretty soon, the South Koreans, they had lost most of the land. However, Mr. Syngman Rhee, he didn't want to give up. So he got on the telephone and he called up President Truman and said, send us some military. Of course, the United States, they had occupied Japan. So it was very easy for them to send some military. And then they asked the United Nations to get involved. And luckily for them, the Soviet Union decided to boycott. They were boycotting for whatever reason. And China, at this point, they were not part of the United Nations. So very quickly, the United Nations got involved. And we saw some military coming from places like France and the United Kingdom and other countries too. Some countries in Western Europe, like Belgium, and some other ones. And then also from Canada and United States, and also from Taiwan and Thailand and some Latin American countries. They all kind of signed on and said, well, we don't want the communists to take over the country. So they pushed the communists back up to the border, to the 38th parallel. But the Chinese, they said, don't cross the line, because if you cross the line, we're not going to put up with it. So, yeah, China, they were speaking quite tough, not like some leaders that we have in the Gulf. But China, they weren't asleep, they were awake. So, yeah, they definitely did something, because President Truman, he did give the order to move north, and very quickly they took over Pyongyang, and they started to firebomb some cities up north, and they destroyed most of them. And the Chinese said, nope, we're not going to put up with it. And they sent over their military. Even Mao Zedong, he sent his son. Unfortunately for his son, he didn't survive. He got bombed. But unlike some leaders that we know of today, like Netanyahu, Mao Zedong, he sent his son to war. Mr. Netanyahu, his son is partying in Miami. He's not at war. So, yeah, there's some difference there. So, there are some differences in these conflicts too, but there's also a lot of similarities. So, the Chinese, they were able to recapture North Korea, but they could never break into South Korea. They made a couple of offenses, but then the UN were able to take it back. And pretty soon in 1953, it became a stalemate and the war was over. They basically, well, they signed an armistice, and China made peace with the United Nations, but Korea is still divided, and very quickly it became two countries. and it was very much destroyed. As I said, the Korean peninsula, it got very much destroyed. It was bombed, and especially Pyongyang and the northern cities. The United States bombed them, just like you would see is going on in Gaza. You could take the same picture and just put a different word on it. And if you put Pyongyang instead of Gaza, it would fit. Or you could flip it. So maybe some parts of North Korea, they were very well destroyed. They say 70%, 80% destroyed. And millions of people, many millions of civilians, they died in the war. So, yeah, if you went onto Wikipedia, you could find that it would say around 3 million. And Wikipedia, they're very pro US. So, yeah, you can find it on there. And many Korean people, they say that 15 to 20% of their population was lost. Of course, that's South Korean people who say that. So North Korean, they might say a little bit more because the loss was higher the further north you go. So both countries, they were pretty much destroyed. So they had to rebuild, and they had their ways to rebuild. South Korea, they got a lot of money from Japan, United States, France, and England, West Germany, even some money from Israel, and they did make some deals with Israel, military deals. Hyundai was one that made some deals, I believe. But South Korea, they built up a lot of technology. Samsung, LG, Hyundai, cars, Daewoo. They have really good cars. So, yeah, Korean cars are very good. So they really built up, and they worked very hard. And because they worked very hard, they got a lot of success in building up their country. And they eventually went from being the military dictatorship under Syngman Lee to being a democracy. And now they choose a new president every 5 years. They just chose a new one last year, I believe. Mr. Yoon is his name. So they always change their president every 5 years. However, the Kim family, they have stayed in power in North Korea. And Kim Il sung, he took control of North Korea. And when the war was finished, well, he launched some different ideas. The first one was Cholima. Cholima was like a horse, and Li is like a distance. Chol meaning 1,000, I believe. So like 1,000 distance horse. That means to go very fast, basically. So yeah, they wanted to build their country very, very quickly, and they started to get to work, and they got some money from Soviet Union and then from China and Eastern European countries. But after a few years, they said, let's go on our own. So he then came up with Juche. And Juche, we can go to Wikipedia. We can see a little bit about Juche. And in Pyongyang, they have the famous Juche Tower. And it looks very interesting. So Juche is the state ideology of North Korea and the ideology of the Workers' Party of Korea. Yes, they call themselves the Workers' Party. So they are considered to be communist. It is a variant of Marxism and Leninism. So this idea of Juche, however, as it says here, it strongly emphasizes the individual, the nation state, and the national sovereignty. So their big issue is anti-imperialism or anti-colonialism. They're very upset that their country has been divided, and they're also very upset that there was a war that killed a bunch of their people and destroyed all their cities. So that's why they had Cholima to rebuild them very quickly. And then they came with Juche, basically saying that we are ourselves and we don't trust anyone. So, yeah, they became kind of a hermit. So, and some people say that Juche is a quasi religion, but we can talk about that in another video series. But for today, we just want to see how these two countries recovered from the war. They say that North Korea actually recovered quickly compared to South Korea. It took South Korea a bit more time, but they were also able to recover. And now they are both seem like they are somewhat wealthy. North Korea, that is. And South Korea, well, they are very wealthy, but also now South Korea, they have a lot of social problems. So if you like the video and subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends and help out our algorithm so we can talk about this more in the next video, because now we want to switch over to the Palestine conflict and we can start. Well, we'll look at this map really quick, and everybody knows what's happened today. Yes, the Palestinians, they're being driven out of the land, and many people, they think this is a long conflict, but, well, it's not. It hasn't gone on for 1,000 years. Now it's only about 100 years old, and we made a couple other videos on this channel, one of them about the Al Aqsa Mosque, so you can go back and watch that, and that talks a bit about what's happening there. So we can start. Well, we'll start with the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, they, well, they kicked out the Jews thanks to Hadrian. Hadrian basically kicked out all the Jews that were left, and the Romans, they had destroyed the temple, and Hadrian, he basically committed a genocide, and the Jews, they got scattered around Europe. So, and then when Omar ibn Khattab, he was the second Khalifa after Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So he came over and to Jerusalem, and they took over it from the Romans. And when they made the treaty, the Khalifa, Omar ibn Khattab, well, he agreed to protect the churches and to protect the Roman heritage sites. So now if you go to Jerusalem, you can still see all the old churches, because under all those years and years of Muslim rule, they protected the churches and the historical sites. That's kind of not what happened in Korea, where everything got bombed. And that's not what the Zs are doing in Palestine today. They're also trying to destroy them, trying to destroy their culture. So, yeah, that's kind of sad. But when we look at Omar ibn Khattab, when he came to the church, then he said it was time to pray. He said he wouldn't pray at the church. Well, he didn't want his followers to build a mosque there. So the mosque, well, it got built in a different spot. So that's very good. So the church, it was protected. And these churches, they are still there today. So we can go to Theodor Herzl. He's considered the father of modern Zionism. Well, the Ottomans, they eventually took over control of Palestine, the Holy Land, and it was the same situation. So they protected the churches, and they protected the Jews and the Christians. As we know, in Europe, that's not exactly what happened. The Jews, well, they got persecuted quite a bit, and many of them came to Muslim countries, including Palestine, to seek refuge. And the state, the Ottomans, they protected them. But then there was a man by the name of Theodor Herzl in the late 1800s, 1897. So he decided that the Jews, because the Europeans were basically persecuting them and killing them, and that was even before Mustache Man. So, yeah, before the Mustache Man of Germany, yes, they were still getting persecuted. So, yeah, he decided that he would create Zionism, and he wanted a state for the Jews. He didn't seem to really care where it would be. At first, he said Argentina, but the Argentines and the Spanish, well, they didn't quite agree. And then they tried to get one in America. Well, the Americans didn't agree either. Of course, they agreed to fund him, but they don't want them in their land. So, yeah, go fund them overseas. Let's do some colonialism stuff. That's kind of what they decided. So, they decided on Palestine, but they had to get the land from the Ottomans because, well, they tried to give money to the Khalifa, the leader, the Sultan of the Ottomans. However, he said it wasn't for sale. So, yep, they were kind of out of luck. So they had to go another way at it. And so they had World War One, and the English, the United Kingdom, they were able to get control of Palestine, and they were able to convince the Arabs to come along with them. Of course, they told the Arabs, you can have all the land, but that's not what happened. But instead, they split up the Arab countries into small little countries that nobody can manage. So, yeah, we already see the division is happening once again. the same countries. Yes, the UK and France, they made some deals. So that's what happened. So then we ended up in 1947. We had a historical Palestine. But by 1947, because the English, they allowed all the Zionists to come, they ended up splitting it in half, basically. Palestine got 44%, and the Israelis, they got 56%. But kind of like what happened in Korea, there was also a war, and then there was the Nakba, and lots of Palestinians got killed. And then they came up with a compromise in 1967, but only 22% of the land belonged to the Palestinians. However, today, the Palestinians, they don't have much control over their land. And it looked like Donald Trump, he had made a plan for 15% of the land to go back to Palestine. But the Arabs, of course, they won't agree. So, of course, they won't. So now we have a conflict and disease. Every day they're trying to take over Gaza. Every day they are destroying it, bombing it, destroying the churches. Yes, they're destroying churches, and they're destroying mosques and homes and markets and all their infrastructure. And like I just said, it looks the same as what Korea looked like after that war. So we can see some very interesting parallels between these two conflicts. We saw that it was the European powers that came and divided the land, and then we saw some war happen, and we saw what happens when people try to fight back. So we've seen some interesting history. We saw that Korea, however, it is still divided. Both countries worked hard to redevelop, and hopefully both countries can work hard to reunite. So that would be very good for them. So we also hope the same for the Palestinians, that they can get their land and that they can develop it and that they can be successful. So we make that dua to protect them. And we hope that this video, it has been very interesting and you can see some of the parallels. So please like the video and subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends, because the algorithm doesn't know how to help out these types of videos. So you have to be the one that's smarter than the algorithm. So, yep, that is our conclusion for today. That we can see that there is colonialism, and then that the people, they try to fight back against the outside powers, and they responded in different ways. So hopefully, I think in the next video, we will take a more detailed look of what is happening today in both the Korea and in Palestine. So you'll have to come back and watch that video. So please subscribe so you get the notification. So like the video and write some nice comments. And thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.